The moment I realized I had lived this life before came from something small, so small that in another life I might have ignored it entirely. It was the way the champagne glass trembled slightly in my hand as I stood in the crowded engagement hall, watching my fiancé smile at my sister across the room. Everyone else was celebrating. Music drifted through the air, laughter echoed from table to table, and the giant banner above the stage read "Congratulations to Emily and Victor" in shining gold letters. To anyone watching, the evening looked perfect. Victor Halle, the rising star of the investment world, had just proposed to me in front of hundreds of our friends and relatives, slipping a diamond ring onto my finger while cameras flashed and applause thundered around us. My parents were thrilled. My relatives whispered about how lucky I was. My sister Lily even hugged me tightly, telling me she had always known I would marry someone extraordinary. Yet as I stood there smiling politely beside Victor, an icy sense of déjà vu crawled slowly up my spine. I had seen this moment before. Not in a dream, not in a vague feeling, but exactly like this, down to the color of Lily's dress and the way Victor's hand rested possessively on my waist. And suddenly, like a locked door inside my mind shattering open, the rest of the memory came rushing back with terrifying clarity. I remembered the wedding. I remembered the betrayal. I remembered the day I discovered the truth that Victor had never loved me at all. And I remembered how my life ended only 2 years later, with nothing left but regret. In my first life, Victor Halle had entered my world like a storm disguised as sunshine. He was charming in the effortless way that makes people trust him immediately, the kind of man who remembered every small detail about your life and used that knowledge to make you feel uniquely understood. We met at a charity event hosted by my father's company, where Victor had just secured a massive investment deal that turned him into one of the youngest executives in the city. Everyone admired him. My parents adored him. Even my skeptical coworkers admitted he had a kind of magnetic ambition that made success seem inevitable. At first, I believed the same thing. Victor listened patiently when I talked about my work, praised my ideas, and encouraged my goals with a sincerity that felt genuine. He never pushed too hard, never rushed the relationship. Instead, he slowly wove himself into every corner of my life until loving him felt as natural as breathing. When he finally proposed after 18 months together, I said yes without hesitation. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that from the beginning, Victor's real interest had never been me at all. My sister Lily had always been the golden child of our family. Where I was quiet and analytical, Lily was vibrant, charismatic, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. People adored her instantly. Even strangers found themselves laughing at her jokes or leaning closer when she spoke. Growing up beside her often felt like standing in someone else's spotlight, warm but blinding, impossible to compete with. I never resented her for it. Lily wasn't cruel or manipulative. She simply existed in a world that constantly rewarded her charm. But Victor noticed that charm too. In my first life, I never realized the truth until it was far too late. That Victor had originally approached our family not because of me, but because Lily was already dating someone powerful in the political world. Marrying into our family would give him access to connections he couldn't build alone. But Lily was already taken when Victor appeared, so he chose the next closest path, me. The plan was simple. Marry the older sister, secure influence through the family, and quietly maintain the real relationship he wanted behind closed doors. The discovery came 2 years after our wedding in my first life. I remember the moment with horrifying clarity. I had returned home early from a business trip, hoping to surprise Victor with dinner. The house was quiet when I entered, the lights dim except for the soft glow coming from the living room. At first I thought Victor was watching television, then I heard Lily's voice. The sound froze me in place halfway down the hallway. She was laughing softly, an intimate laugh I had heard countless times growing up, but never expected to hear inside my own home late at night. When I stepped into the living room, the scene waiting for me felt unreal, like a cruel hallucination my mind refused to process. Victor and Lily were sitting close together on the couch, their hands intertwined in a way that made the truth instantly undeniable. For a long time none of us spoke. Victor looked shocked but not ashamed. Lily looked guilty but not surprised. And in that moment I understood something devastating. They had never truly hidden it. I had simply trusted them too completely to see what was happening in front of me all along. The months that followed destroyed everything I once believed about love and loyalty. My parents begged me to keep the scandal quiet for the sake of the family's reputation. Victor insisted the relationship with Lily had developed unexpectedly, as if betrayal were some kind of natural accident. Lily cried and apologized repeatedly, claiming she never meant for things to go so far. But apologies meant nothing after that kind of deception. I filed for divorce, determined to rebuild my life without them. Yet the damage had already spread deeper than I realized. Victor used his connections to quietly sabotage my career opportunities, ensuring I would struggle financially after the separation. Lily drifted away from the family entirely, disappearing into the same elite circles Victor now dominated. And 2 years later, exhausted and alone after a long night at work, I fell asleep behind the wheel on a rain-slick highway and never woke up. Now, standing once again in the engagement hall with the diamond ring still warm on my finger, those memories flooded back so vividly I almost dropped my champagne glass. The music continued playing. Guests continued cheering. Victor smiled down at me with the same practiced tenderness that had fooled me once before. But this time I could see through it clearly, like spotting a crack in a mirror that once seemed flawless. Every word he spoke suddenly carried a hidden meaning. Every glance he exchanged with Lily across the room looked slightly too familiar. In that moment I understood something important. I had been given a second chance at this life, and there was no way I would repeat the same mistake again. For the rest of the evening I played my role perfectly. I smiled for photos, thanked guests for their congratulations, and accepted every compliment with the polite grace expected of a newly engaged woman. Victor seemed pleased by my composure, unaware that my mind was quietly rearranging the entire future he believed was guaranteed. By the time the last guest left the hall that night, my decision had already been made. I would not confront Victor immediately. I would not accuse Lily or expose the truth in a dramatic scene. Instead, I would wait. Because this time I had something far more powerful than anger. I had knowledge of the future. Over the next several months I began carefully reshaping my life in ways Victor didn't notice. In my first life, he had gradually convinced me to transfer many of my financial assets into joint investments he controlled. Now I quietly moved those accounts back under my personal management before the wedding could legally bind them together. I also accepted a promotion opportunity overseas that I had once declined because Victor wanted me close to his business operations. This time I signed the contract immediately. Meanwhile, Victor continued behaving exactly as I remembered, attentive in public, subtly distant in private, increasingly fascinated by Lily whenever she visited our home. The pattern was almost painfully predictable once I knew what to look for. 6 months before the wedding, I finally ended it. Victor was sitting in his office reviewing financial reports when I walked in carrying the engagement ring he had given me. The sunlight from the tall windows behind him cast long shadows across the polished floor, making the room feel colder than usual. He looked up with mild curiosity as I placed the ring on his desk. For a moment he simply stared at it, confused. "What is this?" he asked slowly. I met his eyes calmly. "Our engagement is over," I said. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy between us. Victor blinked once, clearly struggling to process the statement. In my first life, I had always been the predictable one, loyal, forgiving, unwilling to cause conflict. The idea that I might walk away before the wedding probably never occurred to him. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked finally, his voice tight. I shook my head. "No, it's a correction." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a new expression that felt almost analytical. "You're making a mistake," he said calmly. "Think carefully about what you're throwing away." I almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. "I already did," I replied quietly. A week later, the news of our broken engagement spread quickly through our social circle. My parents were shocked and furious. Friends demanded explanations. Lily avoided my calls entirely. Victor released a carefully worded public statement claiming our separation was mutual and respectful, protecting his reputation as always. But none of that mattered anymore. Because for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was no longer trapped in the future someone else had planned for me. The day I boarded the plane to begin my new job overseas, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a quiet sense of freedom that settled deep in my chest like sunlight after a storm. Somewhere back in the city I left behind, Victor and Lily would probably continue their story exactly as they wanted. But this time I wouldn't be part of it.